The hands. That's right, the hands. Listen, rookie, take it from old JD, Buck Savage, that bad guys don't kill you with their feet. They kill you with their hands. You've got to be totally aware of the environment and always watch their hands. On every traffic stop, on every contact, watch the hands. Here.
Buck? Buck?
Hey! Hey! Of course I'm all right. Takes more than a little slip to hurt old Buck. But what did I tell you? Watch those hands, huh? Yes, sir. You're one lucky rookie to have old JD, Buck Savage, for your training officer for 5 whole weeks. Yeah, I'm going to teach you the ins and the outs, the tricks and the treats of crime fighting. Lesson number 1. Remember, you're always before the public eye. We gotta look sharp and be sharp. Oh, whoa, say hello.
Morning. Can I take your order?
Yeah, I'll have a cup of Java and milk for the kid. And hurry back, baby. I tell you what, I have seen full figures, but that's incredible. Oh, the bus from Sun City must stop here. Look at that old guy back there. God, I hope he doesn't inhale anything or have a heart attack right during lunch. It's so embarrassing that CPR junking on his chest and stuff. Oh, God.
Hey, Buck, wear your helmet this time, too, would you please?
You know, you're right, Sarge. Old Buck wouldn't go anywhere without this old crash helmet, but I really don't think I'm going to need it. Also, I think it kind of brings down that big macho image we're kind of shooting for on the bikes, huh, gang? Well, look, Patch, let's go.
Yeah, Buck, old guy, this is gonna be a little tougher than we thought.
If you break the law, if you decide to do this, we're going to hold you responsible.
You are the only good thing in someone's worst day. That is a privilege for a police officer.
At the very least, you could honor the sacrifices of police officers and their families.
We have the ability to save the Republic. Welcome, my friends, to the On the Blue Line podcast for law enforcement. I am your host, Wayne Mulder, and this is the podcast that helps law enforcement officers overcome the mental health toll of the profession to become better leaders and protectors on and off the job. You already got to meet this week's guests. Those are the old JD Buck Savage videos. Definitely go to the links below in the show notes and you can watch all the videos. Those are just a little montage I threw together to introduce this week's guest, who is Lieutenant Dave Smith. Tell you, he is just a funny guy, and I love those videos. He's also the husband of last week's guest, Sergeant Betsy Smith. So I think you're going to enjoy this. A little bit different of an intro since I showed you those videos first. So I just want to remind you, follow us on social media. We're most active on X or Twitter or whatever you want to call it, which is at On the Blue Line and the number 1, at On the Blue Line and the number 1. And then we are on all the other social media at On the Blue Line Podcast. And then please, if you would, leave a rating or review, 5 stars. Please, if you enjoy the show, but that helps to get it out to more people. I do have to warn you, if this is the most overtly political conversation that I've had since starting the podcast. I think it's a good conversation. I think it's an entertaining conversation, and I think you may even learn something in this conversation, but it is an overtly political conversation. So I'm just giving you the little advisory up front. I hope you will still listen to it, but if not, come back next week. We'll have some more of our standard guest, and we'll talk a lot about law enforcement, mental health, and other things in the law enforcement career. But I think that this conversation can be equally as important, because really we're talking about foundational principles. And what's ironic is, as I said last week with Sergeant Betsy Smith's episode, is several of these were recorded months and months ago. And as promised, I will get all of this content out. And the good news is in about 6 weeks, we'll be caught up, and then we will be putting out content in real time, because I'm actually going to be changing the format a little bit too. And I hope that you enjoy that. But to my point, the interview that I had with Dave is just as relevant today as it was all those months ago when we sat down and had this conversation. In fact, I would probably argue with some of the things we're seeing over the last couple of days, it's more relevant today than it was back then. So I hope you enjoy it. Definitely give me your feedback at ontheblueline.com, feedback at ontheblueline.com. I'd love to hear what you think as I do different things with the show, and I love to get that feedback because then that gives me some direction to bring you the best content that you enjoy. Because if you enjoy the content and you come back week after week, then that allows me to make the content that I can bring you week after week. See how this reciprocal relationship works? So without wasting any more time, Dave Smith, probably best known for those JD Buck Savage videos, but he has done a lot in the law enforcement space. He's a writer. He's a speaker. You're going to see his work in multiple locations, Police Magazine, Officer.com, The Trainer, Police Marksman, Caliber Press, more and all that in this conversation. So without taking any more time, here is this week's guest, Lieutenant Dave Smith, or better known as JD Buck Savage. All right. Well, Dave, thank you for joining me. Welcome to the program.
Well, thank you. It's always fun. And I tell you what, we have a lot of things to talk about nowadays.
There is no shortage of things to talk about, from law enforcement to the end of Western civilization and many things in between.
Sadly, but truly, yes.
Let's start, though, with the easy question. Before we get to the end of the world, we'll start with, is it coffee or tea for you?
Oh, I'm a coffee guy all the way, and I drink it just like my grandmother taught me, with cream. And
Okay.
go out, get up in the morning, and my IQ is about 13 till I've had my second cup of coffee. So that's how I get going in the morning.
You and me both. It is a must. Now, earlier today, I spoke to a guy from Georgia, so he had to sneak in there the sweet tea in the afternoon. But yeah,
I cannot do. First time I ever went to the south, I went down to Glencoe at Fletzy there to give a class, and I went into one of those southern restaurants there, the barbecue place there. I think it's Sonny's, it's called. Really, I love the food there, but I go in there and I made the mistake being in Arizona, and I just asked for iced tea, and I took a drink, and I think I was a diabetic in 8 seconds. It was the most, I had never had so much sugar concentrated in one drink in my life. And I had to request, and I learned to say unsweet in the South. Always before you ordered iced tea, it's unsweet first.
It absolutely is. Being an Indiana boy myself, it was shocking.
Exactly.
So do you have a best or worst travel story?
God, I tell you what, I've had so many, and I would lament. For instance, one time I got through doing a seminar. I'm in the East Coast. I'm on my way I was living in Chicago at that time, and all of a sudden they shut down Midway Airport. And in the middle of winter, we had to land at Cleveland, and they let us off the plane, and then they shut the airport down. So I'm standing there, and so I've always complained about that. I had to rent a car and drive the rest of the way to Chicago, 7-8 hours. And the thing is that what's just happened with Southwest, for instance, my stepsister tried to come visit us. She spent 36 hours sitting in San Diego on her way from Boise to Tucson. So I guess I really can't complain. And, part of me really likes travel, but I hate now being processed. But I love people watching. Yeah. And you always see that these airports nowadays, people watching truly is an adventure in amateur psychology,
Yes, it is. It may make you more fearful for the future as well, but it is fun to watch, yes.
I know I watch an apocalypse movie from the 80s, and it's like, well, that's already been done. We're done there now.
Yeah, since when was George Orwell a how-to manual?
It's not supposed to be a blueprint, guys. It's supposed to be a warning.
Exactly. This was the road to not go down. But anyway, we'll get to that in a minute. Do you have a favorite or most meaningful modern nonfiction book?
Oh, gosh, so many, because I read so many good ones. I enjoy all of Mark Levin's, because I always, my degree was political science. So I've always considered myself a political scientist, even though I went into law enforcement instead of law school. But, I always find Mark Levin entertaining. So many, for fun, I'll read a Malcolm Gladwell, and then I don't agree with him on a lot of things sometimes, but I do like his ideas. So things that I like to exercise my mind and learn about. Right now, I've just got a book I just started, Race to the Bottom, about our education system. And I might have to have a drink, read as I'm going along, watching us go downhill.
Yes. I'm finding that as well with some of these books, especially Mark's and Glenn's and some of these others. It's like there's nothing here positive. I just got to take it in small doses.
We really did surrender a lot of our future to these people, and what's sad is, of course, you and I are actively involved in dealing with the law enforcement issues, and the problem you have is you say to yourself, where is that? We used to tell our children, if you get lost, who do you see? What do you look for? And now you literally have the media acting like, well, you wouldn't want to see a police officer because they might just shoot you. And you're like, what idiocy, what lunacy. And again, it's that it hasn't just gone to the edge of stupid. It's gone to absurd. And yet Americans, they don't call it a lie like they should. I keep thinking back to the old saying in the Soviet Union, they had a name. In Russian, it means the white lie. But it's a white lie where you lie and they know you're lying.
Okay.
And I remember reading the definition of it. They call it's like a game, and it was in the Soviet Union. And they go, they lie to us. We know they're lying. They know we know they're lying, and they keep lying to us, and we keep pretending to believe them. And I read that years ago, and I thought, boy, that's terrible. And here we are doing that. We let the media lie to us, with our president lie to us. We let our politicians lie to us just day to day, and we just pretend to believe them. We have to stop pretending.
Right.
It's a lie. Vranyo is the term in Russian. Vranyo, the white lie. Yeah, I knew I'd pop it up. I didn't know we were going to talk about this, or I'd refresh my brain ahead of time, preloaded for this, so to speak. But it frustrates me because the lies are so continuous. And, the irony gene is dead in the modern media. They're not, of course, they're not media. They're propagandists anymore anyway. Right. But they can never sense a sense of irony when they're saying something about something to like let's take Biden's papers, right? Well, it's co-equal with President Trump having it. Well, the problem is the vice president is not co-equal to the president. All right. Whatever you may think about Trump's papers, the issue is the vice president has no justification for classified papers, and that's what he had in his garage with his. Right. Well, of course, what could be more secure than where you store your vet? Forget that safe with all those Secret Service guys at Mar-a-Lago. And again, I'm not advocating for Trump. I'm just saying look, be consistent. If you're going to lie to me, try to at least have some consistency,
Right. And adding the lock to the door that they requested, like they did at Mar-a-Lago.
Oh, God. God, it's so crazy because, again, this is one of those things where as law enforcement officers, we always believe, look, here's the law. And if you have a conduct that breaks that law, I arrest you. It's very simple, very cut and dried. So let me just explain something about the American legal system to all you people who aren't cops out there watching this. Is you have the law and then you have authority, and the authority is subordinate to the law, and that law is absolute. Remember that Lady Justice has a blindfold, so yes. She can't. Well, now the Democrats will take the blindfold off. Let's look and see what party are you, what race are you, what gender are you, what are the. So we've now stratified law and made the law subordinate to authority. And the Constitution is completely irrelevant. Well, the Constitution is supposed to be over all, then the law, and then authority. And until we reestablish that, it's just getting worse and worse and worse,
Right. In fact, and I've had this conversation with some others recently, and I'd be curious on your thought, which this wasn't a road I was going to go down, but I love it. So, the government is literally doing the opposite of what its intended role was. The whole point was protecting those inalienable rights, and securing the border and war are really the only two things constitutionally that they should be doing at the federal level. And then a lot of it is remanded to the states and the people. So, yeah, right. It's literally the opposite of what the intent was.
Well, our forefathers actually wrote extensively about this, and they said governments are formed to give security and safety and the ability to obtain happiness for their people. Nowhere does it say they're going to take your money. The reason, if you remember, the original Constitution wouldn't even allow income tax, right. Because, again, those guys all read Plato, Aristotle. They studied all these the great writings. They knew exactly what went wrong if you had a pure democracy, where you're going to have pure democracy always leads to tyranny, and you see that in these cities now that are one party cities. Yep. Where again, the rights are eventually eroded away under the administrative state, which is a common term. They didn't have that term back when we formed our country. But you read the Constitution, you read the Declaration of Independence, you read our Bill of Rights. It's very clearly restrictions on government and limitations on government, not on us. And in fact, in 1856, when the Republican Party was started, which would later start a war 5 years later in 61. They said simply they were trying to reaffirm both the Constitution and the Bill of Rights for every person everywhere. And that was the whole thing. They didn't just say, let's end slavery. What they said, it's time to just reaffirm what we've already written and declared as our purpose. Yeah. And I guess what should happen today is we need to at least the Republican Party should say, yeah, I reaffirm that we believe in the Constitution. We believe in the Declaration of Independence. Somebody has to. And my problem is I see a lot of politicians, either side, doing a lot of euphemisms about socialist issues and administrative control issues and not freedom issues. So it's getting depressing, especially the more and more doubt we have in our elections, the more and more tension builds up in our society.
Absolutely. And then now what we're seeing with prices rising and so forth. So taking it taking it back to law enforcement, this is something I talk about a lot, and with all of your experience and stuff, I'd be curious your thoughts on it, is we really, I make the argument, so not only do we live in a time where there's obviously some concern, or we've moved so far from the original intent, and as you look back and become kind of a student, I give my mother and grandmother a hard time a lot, because I'm like, you guys are why there's Woodrow Wilson and FDR. It's like this problem didn't happen yesterday. This didn't happen during Obama. It just came to light under Obama. So, that's a conversation I have with them. But that being said, what we're in now is like pure idiocy. We can't even define what a man or a woman is. By 2030, you'll own nothing and be happy the world according to Klaus Schwab. So all that being said, I make an argument often that the final safeguard in our American system is law enforcement, especially when you talk your sheriffs and your deputies and constitutional officers. What are your thoughts on that? Because this is kind of a big part of what I talk about and on the Blue Line is trying to educate law enforcement officers, because I really do think they have a major role in being that last safeguard to our constitutional rights.
They are. The very office of sheriff was created around 900 by a guy named Alfred the Great. Because we don't teach history anymore, hardly anybody knows that. But what he did is he'd made a bargain after crushing the Danes. There was originally a whole bunch of kingdoms. All you got to do is watch Game of Thrones and see what was going on back then. The Danes came in and they were literally the White Walkers. They kicked butt. And then this guy, he rallies the Anglo-Saxons and they get victory. And then he sits down the Danes after they've destroyed England. And he says, you stay, you help build my country, and I'll guarantee your freedoms. I'll guarantee you can be citizens in our country, And to make sure that he guaranteed those rights, he created the office of sheriff, which in Old English meant essentially the manager of the county. And they had the power to collect taxes. You all remember that's where Robin Hood came from. The sheriff was gathering up all the monies, and they had the power to make sure that a trial was fair, the people's rights. And people don't understand this, but the sheriff, the reason Alfred gave him the purse is that gave them control over the Anglo-Saxon noblemen. No nobleman's happy that his villages are filled with a bunch of Vikings, So this was the kind of thing he did. He created this role. And to this day in the United States, it's still the role. They are still constitutional representatives. They are elected by the people in the vast majority of states, and they represent your constitutional liberties. And frankly, I'm very proud that so many sheriffs are still. Look what's happening in Illinois.
You're right.
The sheriffs are saying, no, I'm not doing it. No, I don't believe that's constitutional. And we may come to a point where we have to make some severe decisions, because that pressure release valve in our society that we call elections is so discredited now. And frankly, when you study the history of violence in any place in the world, the United States has always had that wonderful pressure release valve. No matter how bad things are, I know in 2 years I have an election. And now I don't trust that election, especially living here in Arizona. None of us believe, even the Democrats here don't believe that was a legitimate election. And yet here we are, tension building, and our sheriffs are standing. Only one sheriff throughout Arizona that I heard that isn't standing strong with the others.
Yeah. Yeah, I've heard the same, and I think that's great. I think it's so needed that, people just have to stand. We were so comfortable, my generation especially. So I was born in the late 70s under the disaster of the Carter administration, but I was too young to know. And I grew up in the Reagan era. So that was my impressionable years. And so I really got to see that. It's funny, I often say growing up, the only things I worried about was, beating Russians and staying away from quicksand, because I thought that was going to be a much bigger deal than it ended up being. So
yeah, until you're in it, you just don't even think about it. That's what quicksand. And apparently with Russians too, with communism, with America's liberties, you're right on. Because again, I was born in 52, so I've been it all. I was sitting there. I came in from patrol in the 76, and they announced Carter had won. And a couple of our guys in patrol, I was with the Tucson Police Department back then. A couple of our guys had voted for him, and I chided them greatly. I still, to this day, I'll run into a buddy of mine, George, over here at my local Safeway, and I'll still chide him about that. For God's sake, what did you do to our country? Yes. And all he can do is hang his little head in shame, because boy, that next 4 years brought us Reagan. So one of the things we've always seen is in our country, the ability with us to use elections to rebalance that pendulum, as we talk about, to swing it back the other way and instill a more favorable system. Reagan is definitely the descendant of the Goldwater's failures in 64, and frankly, Goldwater was coming off an assassination of Kennedy when he was running against, you think about it, 63 Kennedys killed. Then in 64, you have the election with JFK or with Lyndon Johnson against Goldwater, and they tried to get Goldwater to appear as a terrorist, and he was anything but. He was an actual real American. And at the same time, he was a libertarian Republican versus the Romneys and the Rockefellers back then. And so they were able to do exactly what they did this last election, the establishment, so to speak, not support Goldwater. Well, but his message was so powerful. And sure enough, man, here comes, after Carter's absurdities, here comes, Reagan, and just rock and rolls. Goldwater got crushed. LBJ left, we got Nixon in there, and then Nixon got canned, and you saw all these things, but you saw that throughout history, then that trend, that pattern, and boom, then along comes Reagan, and you have this conservative revolution. Now it's all been unwound, and I don't know what's going to happen. That's a long explanation, but I agree with you. We're in trouble.
Yeah, well, what my fear now is that we're moving more towards this globalist mindset, where it really isn't we really aren't wrestling against Republican and Democrats anymore. I mean, it really is these globalists and this Davos crowd that has influenced the Democratic Party and much of the Republican Party. And I mean, that seems to be the road that we're on, which is my greater fear, is because it's not the old statement of the pendulum, that we hear over and over again, and that those that I've talked to with more life experience, have often talked about. My fear is that pendulum may not go back when we're looking at completely moving away from foundational principles.
The question is, do they disable the ability for us to make change? And that's essential to, again, our lack of violence in our society. The South decided that with the election of Lincoln, they weren't going to, that Republican Party, that new party, it was a brand new party. The third parties normally just create chaos. You look what the Bull Moose Party did, gave us Wilson,
Right, yeah.
The problem is that for us today, when we have to look at this, is that, you have people talking about new parties, because the Republican Party is schizophrenic. You have the DC crowd, which is the McCarthys, who just did get pulled in line by some, and everybody's writing up, oh, the Republicans are terrorists, the holdouts. Here back home, we're celebrating our Navy SEAL, Eli Crane, for standing his ground and getting all those concessions that are essential, really, if you're going to have a Republican House that's going to be effective. But at the same time, we're asking ourselves, where is my party? What has happened? Mitch didn't support Blake Masters here in Arizona, who was, and he's like, well, he's a poor candidate. Poor candidate. The guy's brilliant. I know this guy and his family. We went out and we worked with him. He is brilliant, and he's a local guy. But again, when the party head starts giving you signals like, well, they're not the best bunch of candidates, and boy, that Carrie Lake is the most. The Democrats, mark this point in your program. The Republicans have in Carrie Lake the most charismatic, dynamic, rhetoric, what would you call it? Political power ever. This woman, she communicates better than any person I've seen in my lifetime. She organizes thoughts on the spur, and at the same time, she's got a natural charisma. And the thing is, she speaks to people, the grassroots, and they hate that. They hate that here in Arizona. The problem is they're going to wish they tied her down as our governor, because now we have an idiot for a governor, literally an idiot. Yeah. And she's as radical. And that's another thing. I'm so tired of people saying, well, we had weak candidates. The Democrats, they had clowns for candidates and they won. Yeah. Tell me about then you're right. You mentioned idiocy. Who'd have thought the movie was a prescription, just like the book 1984 for idiocy, because this is absurd. Yeah. We are run by idiots in the state of Arizona now, and our Republican Party at the state level is almost supine, just laying there. But they should be fighting back constantly. And my problem too is, the American people, you better wake up, because they've already tried to literally defund your civil society. Once you get rid of the police, you don't have a civil society anymore. Right. It really is a law of the jungle. Then good luck, folks. Yeah, it's all frustrating. Well, this is a therapy. This isn't a podcast. This is a therapy session.
Exactly. Here's your banana republic if you can keep it. Yeah, That's
Franklin was alive today, right? He'd make Will Rogers look like an amateur, right?
Yes, he would. Yeah, it's sad. It really is. And it really does come fruition to kind of what I wanted to get in a little bit today. Let's segue over for a minute to maybe just tell the listeners a little bit about your experience, just so they can kind of resonate with, you came into law enforcement at some point. So just take us from there and a little bit through your experience.
Yeah, I was, I graduated from the University of Arizona and started with the Tucson Police Department back when Tucson was one of the top cities in crime, and it still is. That was January of 75. Eventually, I went over to the Department of Public Safety, which is Arizona's state police, and rose my way up to being a lieutenant. While I was in training in 1980, I was sitting around, we had a really great video section there at DPS, and we were talking about the training quarterly, which was a video training piece that went out every quarter to all the agencies in Arizona. And I just said, it'd be nice if we did a little safety tip or something humorous to break up our segments, because we have all these talking heads, and the group goes, yeah, but they'll never let us do it. So we thought, well, let's just use the power of positive annoyance till they let us do it. And so sure enough, eventually we got a new director from Phoenix. Tom Milstead came in. He said, well, yeah, let's give it a shot. And boom, next thing I know, I'm doing graduations as Buck Savage in Denver. I'm going, it's just amazing. I know next thing. And so he loved it, and Milstead loved it. We were eventually named the top video unit in the United States. It was just, that's what Director Milstead wanted. He wanted his agency. We had one of the top bomb techs in the world in David Audsley. We had all these things that he promoted, and he really wanted his department to be the best. And at the same time, for me personally, I grew and grew to learning more and more. And I eventually started teaching officer safety for Caliber Press while I was still a sergeant in DPS, and it cost me a couple of marriages, but I guess that's the price of success. I don't know. But, the thing is, it was a great adventure from that point on, and it always has been. I eventually went to the law enforcement. I retired from DPS as a training commander, and I went to Dallas, the law enforcement television network doesn't exist anymore. So I bring this up, and then everybody looks at me blankly nowadays, and I keep forgetting how old I am. But these youngsters don't know what that was. Gang, that was a video, it was the CNN for cops is what we marketed back when CNN actually did real news.
Oh, really? There was a day that they did real news?
There Yes. And you'd get that Stegosaurus out of the way and you'd watch your show. Exactly right.
Fair and balanced, yeah.
Exactly. I take my nickel and go to the movie. So the thing is that was so funny because we had it was a satellite received. So it had these huge satellite dishes all around the United States and Canada. And we had 4,000 agencies, so 250,000 cops watched our programming. And we would bring in the best trainers from around the country. It was great. And I like to think it was a quantum change in police training because from that point on, mediocrity wasn't accepted anymore. There was no, science side of the house, no police science, none of that stuff back then. And we really were bringing it all in, and you saw it start to sprout up everywhere. People was realizing, let's look at motor learning science and how, we brought Dr. Richard Schmidt in from UCLA Human Performance Labs to do learning theory and explain how to teach the cadets more effectively, how to teach skills more effectively. And these are all things we did that I dreamed of doing, and then we did it. Unfortunately, along came something called the internet, which you're all on right now,
yeah.
which where it took me $10,000 to edit a half-hour program in an edit suite with an editor and all the electronics. You could do it on an Apple in 2 hours for nothing. Because those poor interns got paid. They were all working their way through University of North Texas or one of the universities there in town. And we had these free interns and we would have them do it, and the problem is I kept telling the management, we got to get off the satellite. It's so expensive. Because when we started, the satellite was really cheap. But by the time we went out of business, satellite had gotten so expensive and it just drove the market. It drove us out of the market and we were too late to get into the internet system. It's just, if you study the nature of business, it's called the innovator's dilemma. Whatever technology you buy into, it costs you a lot of money.
Right.
And the problem is technology isn't static, as we all know, right? You guys get into a police car now, it looks like a cockpit. I didn't have a portable radio when I got in my police car, guys. So you got to picture the nature of technology changes so dynamic, and corporations have to adapt or die. We had purchased Caliber Press. I moved up to Chicago to run that. So I married my police sergeant, because every lieutenant needs a good sergeant, just for simple things like which hand to use, what do I eat with? I'm really confused here. I got my sergeant here, real handy. And she had 29 years in a Chicago suburb. And it's just been, for me, a great adventure. When the Caliber sold, we were like, oh, we can live anywhere. So she retired from her agency and we moved back to Tucson. And here I am back in Arizona, which used to be a really, really, red state. Now it's not.
Yeah, I don't understand how Arizona is not, but that's a different conversation.
Nobody understands it here. Nobody.
Yeah.
And guess what? Tension's growing because nobody trusts this election system. I work the elections. Betsy and I work the elections down here on the Tohono O'odham reservation. We work that polling place. And it is the most jury-rigged deal you've ever seen in your life. It literally is. What was the name of those things? Rube Goldberg. Remember the Rube Goldberg? You too, Dane Young.
Yeah, I'm probably too young for this. I'm usually pretty good with historical things, but I don't. You got me on this one.
Everybody, pick up your phone and Google Rube Goldberg, and that's our voting system. Trust me, it's amazing. It's so ridiculous, and no one's shocked we had no results for 2 weeks or 3 weeks because it's an over-engineered idiocy.
What probably would help if the person running against the other candidate isn't in the office that it runs the elections, and then is the person that wins said election. Like, I'm not a genius. I'm in law enforcement. I was a landscaper before this. So not the brightest guy.
Common sense, mister, you're out the door here. You can't be using any of that. That's just a quality totally gone here. You're way too reality based for us, man. Tell you what.
Yeah. It's funny. Speaking of all of this, one conversation I have with so many people is all these governors, like even Texas. Texas isn't as red as Texas should be. Like it's insane what's going on there. I mean, one day I'm going to call it an emergency and call the National Guard or whatever, and does nothing for like 3 months. So the prescription is see what Ron DeSantis is doing and do that. If they would all do that, we would be set.
Wait, is that called leadership? Yeah.
That is called leadership. We're not cowering.
Hand that baby and send it to Texas and Arizona, please. Good Lord.
I'm hoping we can, except I don't want it to leave.
Oh, I tell you what, now see, this is the thing that's so funny to me is that whenever a wonderfully successful model like Florida comes along, and I'm going to tell you, in the middle of the COVID thing, we went and visited friends and family in Florida to get the hell away from Arizona's ridiculous masking things. My daughter's a dentist, and very early on, of course, in University of Michigan Dental School, they're very heavy into studying infection. Dentists are kind of the experts on infection, right? Because there's nothing filthier than the human mouth. And she wrote this long essay on the particles of a virus and the particles of a bacteria. Well, that mask, you know what it does? It holds that bacteria against your nose, your mouth, and your eyes.
Yep.
So great. But it lets that virus pass right through. And at the same time, there was never any ever proof. Once again, now as the quote science is actually coming into it, we find that there was no efficacy of a mask whatsoever. And what's worse is the vaccines themselves may cause far more long-term harm than good. And when you're vaccinating people that aren't at risk, it's no longer a medical system. It's a fascist control system. I'm going to say that word because I'm tired of people calling Republicans fascists. Buy a vowel, folks. Fascism is top-down control. When the private sector, the media, and the government all work together in an administrative state to dictate to you what to do. Look up Italy, 1933. Okay, just for fun, and study some history.
Yep.
Mussolini wasn't a fool. He was brilliant. And he created the fascist movement. And the thing was, he was so admired over here by the left, gang, by the left.
Yep.
And that's the thing. I think they still admire that fascist. But like all things, Saul Alinsky, you call your enemy what you are, And that's why they're the first ones to name call. Anyway.
Yeah. And even these documents with Biden, we're seeing that firsthand, that if you want to know what they're up to, look what they're accusing everybody else of. So, it's right out of Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals. It absolutely is. Yeah, no, it's sad and it's a disaster. And the only way it's going to the only chance you have is for people, using Ron DeSantis as an example, who are willing to actually stand up. 2020, I was fortunate. Obviously, I live in the state of Florida, so my experience was completely different than most other people. And then we drove out to Wyoming. And that was a great experience in Wyoming. But anytime you left Wyoming, even Montana, it was like, you guys have lost your mind up here. But because that summer of 2020, we went out to Wyoming and they still pretty much had it together. But the states around there, and we drove through Illinois, and obviously that was what it is. But
oh my gosh, yes, we love Wyoming, and it's my favorite state now. Rapidly, we've actually bought property. I'm going to build up there. Because that's where we're all going to try to make it to, gang, when this all goes down. But the thing is, it was very free, and just as was Florida. And the thing is, what we always have to do is what DeSantis is doing is proving that those, quote, conservative values really are basic American values for success and achievement and happiness. You want to have a flourishing economy, free the economy. The Americans, we have a wonderful sense of we work hard, except when you pay us not to work, which the government currently does. We're innovative. There's the reason China rips us off is because we're the innovative capital of this planet. And we used to be one of the top educational. Now we're down at the bottom. When education became dogma instead of learning, we're in real trouble. Just think about it. Your grandfather probably studied Latin in high school. Your great grandfather, if he was working on a farm or a ranch somewhere, had probably a copy of Homer. When de Tocqueville toured this country in the 1830s, he talked about how the American, he said, all the Europeans mock the log cabin. He said, but I first read Henry V, the Shakespearean play, in a log cabin.
Yep.
Every log cabin in the United States he went to, he said, had a Bible and either the works of Shakespeare or the works of Homer. And I'm not talking a cartoon. I'm talking real Homer here, guys.
You got to clarify for the current audience. So.
Yeah. Marge. Anyway, no.
Oh, I love it. Yeah, no, it's true. In fact, there has been almost, I would argue, an intentional dumbing down of the American mind. I mean, and it's that whole quote, which I'm not even going to try to say because I'll screw it up, but soft times create hard men create soft times. And, we're all familiar with that. And it's so true. And that is our hope, is that we actually get men of my age and younger to stand up for the love of God, speak truth, be willing to confront. I mean, the number of men that aren't willing to just simply say, no, men are men and women are women, and we're not, that's a non-starter. We're not even going to pretend that your mental health problems are some sort of reality, and just basic common sense, what would have been common sense, years ago.
Yeah, common, like you said, that old saying, common sense isn't very common anymore. It's just the problem I have. When you mention things like just the difference between the sexes, the fact that you can't debate it without name calling tells you the dogma rather than intelligence involved. And that's one of the things that we got to stop accepting. Again, we talk about the idiocy. Well, it's not just a matter of idiocy. If you remember in 1984, the guy that was torturing the Winston Smith, the protagonist in the book, those who've never seen it, watch the movie. The movie's pretty close to the book.
Yeah.
But they're torturing him, and he's trying to get him to say 2 + 2 is 5. And at one point, he really lets the cat out of the bag, or the ultimate point is, look, I don't want you to say it. I want you to believe it. And that's what's happened in our society. Not only do we have to say absurd things, they want us to believe absurd things. Stop doing it, people. Stop doing it. God.
Yeah. So taking it full circle, and with your experience and having been a shift commander, what do agencies do? What is the future of law enforcement? What is the answer to this? Because you have to. And sometimes I draw a weird parallel, but I grew up in a I grew up in a city, but went to school in a rural part of Indiana and in a little church school. So I remember so often, it's kind of like you're not of the world, you're in it, that kind of thinking, and so I kind of feel that way a lot of times as law enforcement, that yes, you're policing this, but you can't be part of the insanity. You have to be, as you kind of said early on when we started this conversation, you're there to enforce the laws. You're there to, to represent something bigger than this issue that's going on. So what is the answer? Looking at it maybe through that training lens.
As a trainer, here's the thing. You don't give a skill without giving the emotional component of that skill. If I'm teaching you to fight, you have to have the emotional component to be ready to fight, be willing to fight, and win that confrontation. Just like I wouldn't teach you to shoot a gun for law enforcement unless you're mentally and emotionally prepared to use that. Why? What's the moral justification for using that gun? To protect your life and the life of an innocent third person. No one has a right to take your life. We start talking about basic belief systems, and that's one of the problems that they've tried to make sure we can't have any belief systems. We talk about duty, honor, loyalty, selfless service, courage, strength. These are all things that we talk. Well, they're all the ethos or habits of warriorship. Well, if you remember the Obama administration, they started the war on the warrior. Mm-hmm. It was all about take it out. Let's be guardians. Let's be Plato's guardians. And of course, because no one actually ever read Plato, because it's as boring as all get out, and it's very obtuse. And even if you were a philosophy major, I guarantee you bought the little synopsis so you could pass the final, and you didn't read that son of a gun. Plato hated democracy. He doesn't believe in it. He lived through the time of the tyranny. The Athenian democracy collapsed at one point to dictators because that's what democracies do. People vote for the demagogue. People, like in our society we're seeing today, if people are afraid, they give up their freedoms. And that's the thing that's happening in our society. We're giving up those values, those beliefs, those things we intuitively know. Our warriors went out and saved the world in 2 wars. And yet just a few decades later, we're throwing them under the bus. We're making them take vaccines, and we're throwing SEALs out of the SEAL. We're throwing airborne people out of the airborne. We're throwing the very people that will keep you free and safe when the outside attacks. And the same time, internally, the people who keep you safe with a civil society, you're throwing out because they say the wrong thing on Facebook, or because they're too macho, or because they did this or that. And you look for fault, and then you want to take away their right to protect them, but they have to use a force in almost anything now. And we end up in a society that wants a superhuman being that somebody described as a guardian, except when you read what Plato said about the guardians, it's the Gestapo, the KGB, and all those other totalitarian influences, a mindless robot bred and raised and living in a barracks, ready to invoke the philosopher's king's demands on those people who are merely of common souls. They're not golden souled or silver souled people. They're just, bronze souled people. So you don't worry about them. In other words, the common man is to be, well, America's got a grassroots fire going on, and it's turned into a grass fire, and they better have to deal with it, because the thing is that Trump was not the cause. Trump was simply the what you might call the connector of ideas. And he was sort of the tipping point where now you hear people articulate these kind of freedoms and articulate their concerns. People like you who say, well, this is absurd. Why? And people with that microphone. And that's the problem for them. That's why they have all these efforts to silence, because you can't debate logic. You can't debate common sense. They are literally idiots with degrees. Yeah. And we all can see that once people realize they are the naked emperor, they look stupid as all get out. But you got to keep exposing them. And that's the thing. One of the great essays I read was Talib Nassim, the guy that wrote The Black Swan, wrote a book, Intellectual Yet Idiot. And I really recommend it to all of you. It's a great essay. It's free online. You can look it up. Intellectual, Talib Nassim. I might have it backward. Nassim Talib. Yeah. Anyway, I can't.
We'll figure that out.
Too many things. I know. It's not a common name for my brain. But the thing was, he's brilliant. He's brilliant. Got multiple degrees and everything. He came here as a refugee from a terrorist war-torn Lebanon. He kept saying, everybody in his Black Swan, as he describes, everybody kept saying, well, don't worry, this too shall pass. There is no more Lebanon. So anyway, per se, it was so much for the Paris of the Pacific, or the Paris of the Mediterranean, right? But anyway,
right.
We are a country. We used to be the land of the free, home of the brave. We're the brave, and we're becoming a nation of cowards. Stop it, folks. Yeah. Quit being a coward. Raise your children. I was raised by strong women. My mom and my dad had been with the Marines in Korea. He's a corpsman. The day she died, my mom, 85, still had her real estate office and was still active in the Republican Party and was getting ready for a art exhibit on her paintings. There was going to be an exhibit in town, and she was a member of the orchestra guild. She lived life to the fullest. And that's the thing. You Americans, get off your couch, live, for God's sake, and stand up for what your kids, or your kids won't have anybody, your grandkids especially. They'll just be put on buses to go to re-education camps. This is frustrating me, because everybody needs to watch it. There's a half-hour show produced by the guy that wrote a bunch of the Japanese novels that we all loved in the 70s. I can't think of his name right now. James Clavell. And he was a prisoner of war in World War II. And one day his daughter came into him. He had moved to the United States, and he was writing screenplays and writing novels. Highly successful man, brilliant. And his daughter came in. And she said, "Listen, I did the Pledge of Allegiance." And she says, "Now you have to give me a dime. Teacher says if I say it right, you have to give me a dime." And he said, "I'll give you a dime when you explain it." And his daughter couldn't explain it at all. She could just say it by rote.
Right.
But he writes the children's story by James Clavell. Everybody should watch it, because it came true. The teacher, the new Soviet-style teacher, in essence, I'll just tell you the quick plot. The movie starts, or the half hour, it's a TV show, starts with the new teacher coming in from the new regime that just defeated the United States. And in a half an hour, she destroys their faith in God. She destroys their faith in the United States, and she has them tear up the flag of the United States.
Wow!
And you think, I can just imagine when he first put that out in 1980, everybody mocked him. and nobody's seen it today because I think it's pretty much suppressed. But if you watch it, you say, so that's what happened.
Yeah.
And it's pretty depressing. A children's story by James Clavell. Watch it.
Yeah, I will dig into that and watch it. That intrigues me, because you've even seen it. Like the one thing you mentioned there, like with God. I mean, you just see it with the statistics of the Americans that believe in God just in the last 2 decades. I mean, the number keeps dropping. I think this most recent one was like 60 or 70%. I don't know. It's ridiculously low for what it was even 20 years ago.
Tucson and Phoenix, Arizona have some of the lowest church per capita attendance in the United States, and yet we have tons of, for instance, our Mexican American population. You know, Mexico is the most Catholic country on the planet.
Yeah.
And so all these people have immigrated here and lost their faith. It's just terrible. What have we done to do that? And this is the kind of thing you wonder, you know, we better reaffirm our values, which are based on Judeo-Christian values. And instead we let them mock our beliefs. It's ridiculous.
Well, and I think this is this is a completely different podcast than I thought we were going to do, but I really love it because
a lot more depressing than you thought.
Well, I was getting ready to change that. Stay with me.
That Dave Smith, that's a funny guy. Now you're going to tell people, well, that guy, what a Debbie Downer he is. Boy.
Yeah, exactly. So much for helping with mental health issues with law enforcement.
Yeah.
No,
Exactly.
I think it's an important conversation because it's something that I think about often. And I wasn't a political science major, but I grew up with, my dad was a big talk radio guy. So my whole life I've listened to talk radio. I hated it when I was a kid. I was like, you turn that off. I want to listen to the country. Got older. Now I love it, you know, and I listen to a lot of the guys, well, some of them passed, but I listen to a lot of the guys that are still around that he listened to, like you mentioned, Mark Levin and Glenn Beck. And obviously there's a lot of others now. So, I say that to say that one thing is to have knowledge and another thing is to take action. And I think that it is incumbent upon us. I really loved what you're saying with Plato, and quite frankly, I haven't read the works of Plato either. But
you don't have to read his works. Just read chapter 5 of the Republic. I think it's chapter 5. I didn't know we were going to have to do all this intellectual stuff where I had done a review ahead of time. But just go to the Republic, and I think it's chapter 5 where he explains, the actual control of the philosopher king. Anyway.
Well, and I love that because it really is what we're seeing right now with this anti-masculinity movement here in this country that's been going on for a while now. And it's good. And I talk about, there was a writer that had used the term, because that's part of it is we don't like the quote unquote negative sides of masculinity or the warrior culture or the
toxic side of masculinity. Yeah.
Yeah. The toxic masculinity, a term I absolutely detest. Yeah. all very true. But, we still want what that produces. So, we castrate, the quote in the book was, we castrate the gelding, but bid him be fruitful. Well, that's not going to happen. You're not going to have little horses running around. So I think that this is something that does actually apply to law enforcement. And I do kind of want to give the listeners some hope, because I really do think that the bottom line on all this is, yes, things don't look good. Yes, we could be seeing the end times if that's your belief system, or the end of Western civilization. But the other side of it is, we still have some of these freedoms. We still have things like this podcast and other similar ones, and we can still stand up. And so for those who are listening, I think that's an encouraging thing, at least in my opinion, that there's still a chance. It's that quote. I was just last week, I was taking a lieutenant's exam, and one of the books in there was that quote by Heracles that is well known. The one where he says, of every 100 men in battle, 10 should not even be there. 80 are nothing but targets. 9 are the real fighters. We are lucky to have them, since they make the battle. But the one is the warrior, and he brings the rest home. Mm-hmm. At this point, most of us, when we're honest with ourselves, we're the 9 or the 80. The goal is to get people to the 80, and we really need to get, the 10 or the 80. We really need to get to being the 9, if not, and if we're fortunate, we'll find the 1. But I really think that is maybe the message that, in my opinion, is very important. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. This isn't a debate today, that's for sure. We're having a rally. And the thing is that, we talk about these things, like you said, and you bring it up exactly. The kind of things that I agree with, that warrior, Heracles, all these, people just think of, well, they were philosophers, they were historians, they were Greeks, they were Romans. Well, they were all warriors. They're all, there was no, the militia was the army, poor old, what's his name comes through the pass there, to wipe out the Romans, the guy, from Carthage. What is his name now? I just, who I'm talking about.
I know who you're talking about, and I can't think of it off the top of my head.
He comes across, he wipes out a Roman legion, 5,000 to 7,000 people. And 2 weeks later, the Roman citizens have produced 2 equally trained and prepared legions to face it. This is the thing. The Greeks, the Persians, they brought their giant armies across long before the 300. 10 years earlier, they got wiped out. It just got smashed by the Athenians. And the Athenians are supposed to be, they kind of mock it in the movie 300, but the Athenians were kick ass too, and they were all citizen warriors, the problem we have is that we are losing faith in those very things that make us foundation. And I think you had to stand up for what you believe. Stand up, train your children train your men to be strong, train your women to be strong. All my kids were martial artists. And just because I wanted them to have a foundation, the confidence that gave them. But it's simple things, we need to make sure they don't destroy our military. Look what they're trying to do to the Marine Corps. You reminded me some minute ago, and I found this quote that I sent to a friend the other day, because we were talking about Korean War and the Marine Corps and how the Marines were, because McCarthy immediately sent for the Marines because the Army had been eviscerated after World War II. A lot of people don't know this. They did exactly to our Army what they did today. They tried to essentially feminize it. If you were abused by a DI in your boot camp, your congressman would write, and that sergeant would be reprimanded, and the Army had to back off. Well, here comes the North Koreans with all these weapons and all these tanks, and there wasn't an anti-tank gun on the Korean Peninsula on our side. So McCarthy says, let's get the Marines. And a guy named T.R. Fuhrenbach wrote I think one of the best histories of the Korean War in a book called This Kind of War. But in the middle of it, I was reading, like I said, my dad was with the Marines, and he loved his Marines more than life itself. His last words were to me, his greatest achievement in life, after being a physician, a professor of medicine, all these things. His last words were telling me about how he was so proud that he brought all his boys home alive. He saved all of his Marines. That's awesome. Single greatest achievement of his life, right? And what Fuhrenbach wrote about when the Marines got there, he said in 1950, a Marine Corps officer was still an officer. The sergeant behaved the way good sergeants had behaved since the time of Caesar, expecting no nonsense, allowing none. And Marine leaders had never lost sight of their only mission, which was to fight. And that's what we need. We need fighters. We need cops that are ready to fight or nurture. You're trained in the academy. You're ready to save a life in an accident or make a DUI arrest with physical force. But that's when you go there. No social workers coming with that set of skills. Right. And that's the kind of thing the media ignores. The American public know in their hearts they need to quit being cowards and start speaking up. Deny the lie, folks. Deny the lie.
Yeah. I think that's great. I think it's absolutely powerful. And there's so many other things we could talk about, but I think even if we wrap it up there, I think that it definitely speaks to where we are as a country. And I've kind of felt like this has been the theme for 2023. Last year, especially, because we all thought this big red wave was coming, right? This red wave. We were going to vote ourselves out. Yeah, exactly. Man. We were going to vote ourselves out of this problem, right? That was what was going to happen.
That's the pressure release valve, man. That's it.
Right. And we're seeing now that that's not the answer. And even when you put them there, 20 out of 435 is really all we had standing. So I think that for me in 2023, the real mantra, if you would, I don't necessarily like that word, but the real statement for the year is it's time to stand. I mean, it's not going to get any easier. And I really think that whether you're in law enforcement or whatever profession, whatever calling you've been given, our churches, if I've got ministers listening to me, I mean, we could go on for another hour on the failures there. I mean, it is time to stand in this country. And I love where we went with this conversation, because even though maybe in some ways it was depressing, I think that the hope is you, right? The hope is the individual listening to this show right now.
Yeah. That's always been America's strength, because we're individualists. And that's the thing. Be your individual, gang, and be proud of what your beliefs are. There's all these little snipers I find everywhere. They sit on the side, they're on Facebook, they're everywhere. And they want to, and some of them aren't liberals. They're just they're elitist conservatives. And all they want to do is denigrate and snipe and attack your ideas. They offer nothing. But at the same time, they're so good up on the hill shooting down at you. And that's the kind of thing, folks. Ignore them. Keep going. Believe in what you do, your mission. And again, duty, honor, loyalty, selfless service, courage, strength. That's the thing. We are the selfless servants of our society, whether they want to acknowledge it or not. That's your mission, to go out there and keep America free. Your mission, that's the whole thing. If you're out there worried about being prosecuted by your own county attorney, that makes it pretty difficult to do our job. And the Americans, stop doing it. Stop hamstringing the people who keep you free. Or frankly, you just won't be free. You have a bunch of guardians that'll load you on a bus and send you to camp for re-education.
Yep.
Don't laugh about it, because think about it.
Well, and yeah, and the thing is there's older people who've seen, that saw what happened in like China, with the re-education and there's
still happening in China.
Well, yeah, but it's happened, and so to pretend like it can't happen here is foolishness at best. So
no, in his great book, Escape from Freedom, Erich Fromm said, the German people just literally found freedom too hard, and they surrendered it to Hitler. And that's the problem. Don't surrender your freedoms because you're afraid. Fight for your freedoms. Fight for your great grandkids. Think multi-generationally. Say that fast. Think multi-generationally for a while, instead of just about what your next hamburger is coming from.
I couldn't agree more. What is next for you and your projects? Any more writing or anything else that the listeners can be looking for?
I am an article behind as we speak, writing for America Out Loud. And at the same time, I still do the back page for Police Magazine. I got it. We just went to a bi-monthly instead of a monthly program. So that took some of the writing pressure off me. But I've got all kinds of things, getting involved in politics locally here to try to help unify my party and help us become strong. The thing is it should be a pretty unilateral decision how you vote as a cop. But like I said, I don't understand it. We have a Democratic Party that espouses values, beliefs, and a platform that's not even of this planet. The green. I remember back. I don't know how much time we have, but I just got to say,
we got all the time in the world. I just normally start wrapping up around this time, but we got all the time in the world, Dave. Keep going.
You're trying to get to lunch. That Smith never shut up. But the thing is, I remember I was at the Law Enforcement Network. I came out of studio on a magazine I used to get, the Freeman back then, and I got it. And I sat down on my desk and I was reading an article on green is the new red, and how all the socialists and communists were attracted to this new green movement. Mm-hmm. And I thought it was an interesting strategy, but I thought, I don't know how that's going to work for them, because it's kind of abstract, save the planet and give up your freedoms. Those two, that's an odd, dynamic. And yet, what are they talking about today? Save the planet, give up your freedoms, sell your car, take public transport, which, by the way, just for you people, when I studied this in college in the early 70s, that's how old I am, there had never been, and to this day in 2023, when at least when we're recording this, there's never been a profitable public transportation system. Americans don't like it. We want to be in our car. We're individualists. And if they finally make a society where people will just sit on a bus and ride around, maybe that's their goal ultimately. We'll see. But you people don't tolerate it. Stand up against it. You know?
Oh, it very clearly is their goal.
Yeah, it is. Right. I know I got to quit speaking in indirect, passive sentences. I need to get active. It is their goal.
Yeah, I mean, it may not be here yet, but it absolutely is.
Comrades unite. Exactly. Right.
Yeah, with those that are buying into, ESG scores and all of this. Like you said, that green is the new red. You're absolutely right.
Man, it's all become absurd, and they teach our kids to hate each other, and it's just crazy, and I got to tell you, to me, it's so frustrating. We are so passive. Where's the party that's supposed to be defending us stand against this? In Arizona, we had a couple of dynamic young people running on platforms that you and I would absolutely cheer, and they got no support whatsoever from the party, none whatsoever, and it just frustrates me. So that's when I decided to take action. I'm involved now.
That's awesome. And where can people go to learn more about what you're doing with all that?
Well, I'm the county chairman for the Pima County, Arizona, Tucson's GOP. And we put a whole slate together of like-minded America First type people. We're only 60 miles. People don't understand this. Tucson, when I was a young cop, everyone's idealistic when you hit the street, until you hit the street. And then all of a sudden reality slaps all that sociology out of your head, And I just remember thinking, boy, my criminology professor, I had a Dean Rojek who was a communist, and his whole, crime was created by the friction of capitalism, the haves versus the have-nots. And I went back to him and I said, I'm about 6 months in as a cop, and I'm like, the classical theory is right. Crime is a rational choice. Rational choice theory is 100% right. And anybody who's actually been out of the university parking lot would have seen this. Yeah. And I invited him to come ride along with me in my Midtown beat. And, just the time you walk into our briefing and you'd look at our hot sheet back in those days, there wasn't a computer anywhere around,
Right.
And you'd pick up your hard copy hard sheet and you look at the rapes, you look at the robberies, and you look at all the suspects, and you realize, man, all these people, they come across the border, they prey on our people, and they go back across. To this day, the cartels, run Southern Arizona. And at the point, I told him, please come ride. And he did not, of course. It was the one thing about a good liberal is they don't let reality interfere with their belief system in any way whatsoever. And I learned that in 1975, and I've never given up that belief that good liberal, boy, they'll hold on to irrational concepts all their lifetime. Yeah.
Well, with this current crop, which I don't even know if because they're illiberal, but with this current crop, it's a cult. Like, it literally is a cult. It's its own belief system.
Absolutely.
You were talking about the masking thing. Neil deGrasse Tyson, I mean, essentially a genius level, as far as intellectual.
Show me he's a genius. Show me his real science. But go ahead.
Well, fair enough. But yeah, stuff he was spouting off the other day.
One of those. He's a contrivance. You're right. I know it. Yeah. No, I'm teasing. But yeah, you're right.
Yeah, I mean, he was spouting off the other day about the mask in complete, and with taking the shot that it still could limit your getting the virus and so forth, which is they disproved themselves 18 months ago. They came out and said, maybe we were wrong on this. So
the nature of science is to question science all the time. The minute Fauci said, "I am science," he was discredited by every real scientist in the planet who had the guts to say it. Again, you remember in the Soviet Union, Stalin outlawed scientific thought unless it matched the party dogma. The Ambrosian theory that plants could be educated, plants could be taught to cooperate, that there was it was a very Platonistic dream that things like human nature are non-existent and nature's non-existent. Everything's malleable. And, millions starved in the Ukraine, read Red Famine, and all these things, you realize that there's an idiocy to all of this. And at the same time, thousands and thousands of scientists were executed for trying to be correct and millions starved because of that very thing. Making a joke in the Soviet Union became a crime, right? Yeah. It's a crime in the United States. They don't take you away. They just destroy your life. They destroy your income. They injure your family financially, which is what's the difference between that and a gulag?
Yep.
Read a book called A Mountain of Crumbs. And she talks about how one of her relatives made a joke in a bar, right? He went home that night. The KGB showed up. They took him away. He said, don't worry, it's okay. It's just a joke, guys. And then they contacted the family. Well, he'd been shot trying to escape over a joke, right? And yet the joke in the Soviet Union was that Stalin laughed at the jokes and collected the jokers. Here in the United States, we don't collect you. We just destroy you. We just call you names and then we destroy you. So we're in an odd world, gang. Start laughing, start telling jokes. In the Soviet Union, the passive way the people fought back was to form something called the anecdote, which meant it's a joke, cynical joke about Stalin or the government. And at one point, Stalin had the KGB go out to one side of Moscow and then measure it when the joke reached the other side. 6 hours it took for the joke to get to the other side of Moscow. It literally was the power of the powerless to make jokes about Stalin and the government,
Yeah.
And it's funny, but it's sad because that's where we're headed. You and I have to make jokes, make sure our computer's off and our Alexa's asleep, and all those.
Right. Yeah, and my phone and everything else for that matter.
Exactly. Turn this upside down right here.
No, you're so right. And it is interesting that literally standing up to tyranny at this day and age is really that simple, whether it's joking or just being willing to speak truth. I mean, we're not to the point that your life is dependent on it. So if you're not going to stand up now, when? And it's pretty simple to be able to stand up and be the other side of this because it truly is insanity.
Exactly right. Just stand up. But remember what you believe and espouse it. Tell people what you believe. This is the problem. We don't live up to your dreams, live up to your beliefs, live up to your values. Don't hide in your closet, with your classified papers.
Yes, or hide them next to your Corvette. So I usually end with one final question, but we've answered it about a dozen different ways. But I'm going to give it to you anyway to give us one final thing. So what is the one takeaway, the one thing that law enforcement officers can do that's going to make a difference in their personal lives?
That's one of the things we talk about because we're very active in Wounded Blue and all the other things for officers that are suffering in this day and age is remember you're not just a cop. You're a sister, a brother, a mother, a father. You have all these life things. And that's Dr. Gil Martin, who is maybe the most brilliant police psychologist. I had the good fortune. He was my departmental contract psychologist. And I went to him all stressed and depressed about how the department treated me, And he just in essence said, look, you love being a cop, but don't love your agency. That's not an adult relationship. Love your family, love your dog, love your God, love what you do, and care about each other at work, but don't love the agency because it can't love you back. It's not your agency's job to love you even. And so these officers, we get overly emotionally invested in the wrong thing that can't give us any love back or nurture us back. Love the things that love you back and focus on your life. Remember, you're a fisherman, a hunter, a gardener, you're a writer, you're all these things in your life. You're a friend to others. Just remember that and go practice those things more. That's so important. I love to cook. That's become my hobby. I love to hunt. Never get drawn anymore. What the hell is that about? Anyway, the thing is, do the things that are your positive stress in your life, and it'll help you cope with the negative stress and refocus your priorities. And also, you got 2 days off 3 years ago. If you're going to bed still thinking about it, stop it. You're giving that guy who gave you days off power over your life. It doesn't. He or she is not going to bed thinking about you. Don't go to bed thinking about them. Release it. Let it go. Let it go, guys, and live. Just get up tomorrow and live. You're already warriors. Be proud of it. Go out and do it. Live your life.
That is such great advice. Thank you, Dave. I could literally sit here and talk to you for hours. So thank you.
I know it's therapy for me. I'm feeling better already. So great. Yeah.
Good. I love it. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I'll be sure to link everything up for the listeners, and I really appreciate your time. So just thank you again, and hopefully we can maybe do this again someday.
Anytime. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. So how was that? I hope you enjoyed this conversation. It was truly a pleasure to sit down. I tell you, I did more laughing and it was like sitting down with a friend and just having a beer with him, right? Neither one of us were drinking, But it just kind of felt like that, even though with the depressing topics, maybe we should have been, but maybe next time. So thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Remember, if you actually want to see these videos, if you want to see some of the content I throw in there, make sure that you're actually watching these, which they're available on YouTube and Rumble. You can always start with everything at ontheblueline.com and just go to the show notes page, and everything is linked up to every episode in there. Thank you. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for watching and coming back week after week. Don't forget that I'll see you next Monday morning in Roll Call and next Thursday in the interview room. But in the meantime, as always, I'm going to see you out there on the Blue Line.